Hey folks, welcome to another Tweak Week video here on Passion for Sound. If you haven't caught the previous 4 videos I think we're up to, then you can access the rest of them. That includes an audiophile fuse, some Burson Audio V7 op amps, the Tellurium Q Black 2 power cable and speaker cables. If you haven't seen those and you want to, you can check it out by going to the Passion for Sound channel page, clicking on the icon here in the YouTube app or online of course. And then once you get over there, you can see the list of videos and check out the previous 4 Tweak Week videos. As I've talked about before, these videos are a bit lower production than my usual because it's really just about how these behind the scenes type devices sound. And today, the particular component we're talking about, or the particular tweak we're talking about, is a set of RCA cables. What I've got here today in my somewhat chaotic setup over here for all the tweaks I've been trying is I've got the Tellurium Q Black version 2 RCA cables. These come in at around about $300 per meter, and so they're quite an expensive RCA cable in the scheme of things. There are much more expensive cables, and of course there are cheaper cables. And I was keen to put them up against the 2 cables that I've been using for some time as kind of my references, and that's the Supra Sword RCA cable, the top of the range from Supra, and also the Curious RCA cable. And so I've got currently set up the Enlium AMP23R. It's being driven by the Schiit Yggdrasil OG. The reason I'm using that is it's got 2 RCA outputs, so I can run both the Supra Sword and the Tellurium Q Black version 2 RCA cables at the same exact time from the same DAC, same outputs, etc., and just switch between the inputs on the Enlium AMP23R. So I'm going to take a listen now to the Sword versus the Tellurium Q and tell you what I hear. I'm listening to 3 Golden Trees by Frazey Ford, and the difference between the Supra Sword RCA and the Tellurium Q Black version 2 RCA, it's a long name, the difference I'm hearing is not huge. The Tellurium Q comes across with just a slightly fuller sounding bass. Some might say it's less tight, others might think it's more complete. I think both presentations are really nice. I don't really have a clear favourite between them. What I did notice though was that the sense of clarity and naturalness in the guitar in this track was probably just a little bit better, from the Tellurium Q that is. The sound of it has a bit more of the harmonic richness, but also a really nice sense of clarity in the attack of the strums on the guitar strings. So I think between the two, I think both are actually kind of on par in terms of performance. I might slightly prefer the overall character of the sound from the Tellurium Q, but I think it's a pretty close call. I'm going to have a little bit more of a listen and come back and tell you if I change my mind on that one. But so far, I think it's more a case of preference as opposed to one being better or worse. So I'm going to take back what I said before about the bass. The bass is actually the same between the 2 cables. I just happened to switch at a time that the bass kicked in with a certain sense of fullness when I switched before. So the bass is the same. Where the difference between these cables lies, and it is very small, hence why I'm sort of having to come back and change my description a little bit. The thing that actually changed between these cables was the Tellurium Q has just a slightly greater sense of spaciousness and transparency to the sound. And it's very, very slight. This is one of those where I don't know that people would necessarily pick it blind. They're very, very similar cables. The Tellurium Q to me gives just a little bit more sense of space in the soundstage, a little bit more separation between the individual sounds, and that for me is a very slight improvement over the Supra Sword cables. But it's very, very minor, and I don't know that there's a big enough difference between them to really say that one's better or worse. They're just a little bit different. I personally slightly prefer the sound of the Tellurium Q, and having just looked it up, that's possibly a good thing because it looks like the Tellurium Q is also a little bit cheaper than the Supra Sword. And so at this point, with the Supra Sword sitting at around about the $400 mark per meter versus around $300 a meter for the Tellurium Q, and I'm saying around in each case because the prices are going to vary depending on the country you're in, the retailers you're buying from, etc. But it appears that the Tellurium Q Black version 2 RCAs are cheaper than the Supra Sword, and in my opinion, might just be ever so slightly better. And when I say better, I tend to judge RCA cables and XLR cables, any analog interconnect, by the quality of the space they're able to deliver in the soundstage. And that's because spatial information is contained in 2 areas, one of them being the timing accuracy of the signal coming through as I understand it, and also the very, very tiny kind of micro details in the sound. The more they're able to get through, the more our brains are able to piece together the information that makes up the spatial characteristics of the soundstage, image placement, etc. And that kind of makes sense because one of the things that Tellurium Q talk about in all their branding and in all their focus of their research development that they talk about for their cables, everything they focus on is on timing accuracy. And so that makes sense that it would play out, assuming they're doing it well, and it sounds like they are, that would play out in a better sense of spatial representation, spatial reconstruction, if you like, within the signal. Not that they're reconstructing the signal, don't take it that way. What I mean is they're letting the signal get through to you in an optimal way so that your brain can reconstruct what it's hearing into a sonic image. So that's what I think the Tellurium Q is doing better. The question for me now is whether or not the Tellurium Q can match up to something like the Curious RCA cables, which for a long time have been my absolute go-to. I like the Super Sword, I use them a lot, but it's the Curious RCA that's been my benchmark so far. I'm now interested to see if the Tellurium Qs can match up against the Curious RCAs. After a little bit of fiddling around, I've now got the Curious RCA cables connected to the output of the Iggy that did have the Super Swords on it, and I've just done some flipping backwards and forwards. I'm still listening to 3 Golden Trees by Frazey Ford, just so I had the common reference throughout all the testing. And I have to say, I think the Curious RCA cable and the Tellurium Q are absolutely indistinguishable in terms of the level of their performance. What I mean by that is they do sound slightly different, but it's very, very subtle, and I couldn't tell you that one is better or worse than the other. And that's really good news if you're in the market for RCA cables, because the Tellurium Q Black version 2 is a little bit cheaper, actually it's significantly cheaper, than the Curious RCA cables. The Curious RCA are going to come in at about $500 a meter, that's US dollars, whereas the Tellurium Q Black version 2 RCA cables, as I said before, come in at about $300 US dollars per meter. So you can save $200 a meter. Obviously that's probably going to decline as you go up in length. It changes the proportional cost of the cables. It doesn't scale meter on meter on meter, because some of the cost is the connection of the plugs, the cost of the plugs, etc., and you don't pay any difference depending on length for those things. But the point is, the Tellurium Q Black version 2 RCA cables are cheaper than the Curious cables, and I think they're probably just as good. There is a tiny sense of something, and it's really hard to put my hand on or finger on what it is. The Curious cables are giving me just a slight sense of kind of naturalness in the sound that when I came back to the Tellurium Q, I feel was a bit different. But at the same time, I think some people will hear the Tellurium Q as maybe being more detailed. I'm not saying it's actually resolving more detail, but something about its character is a little bit less easy to listen to. And that can actually draw your attention in and make you feel like it's giving you more, making the music more interesting, exciting, giving you more details. I don't know if that's actually what it's doing. I think possibly it's the Curious RCA cable is just so easy, it's so flowing and natural in its delivery of the sound that I think it's maybe a little bit tricky in the sense that it doesn't do anything to enhance the sound, push it at you. It's just a very natural and realistic and lifelike delivery of the sound via that cable. And that to me is the more enjoyable sound by a very, very small margin. But as I said, some will like the Tellurium Q, some will like the Curious RCA. I don't think you can go wrong either way, and that's fantastic. It means that if you want to keep your costs down, go for the Tellurium Q. If you're happy to spend that extra money, I do think the Curious cables might just be that tiny little bit better again. And so the final thing to say is that these are not a cheap cable. They're far from the most expensive cables I've seen around, but I think they're a really solid cable. There's nothing fancy about the build of them. They've just got a simple sort of nylon feeling sheath. The plugs are nice. They're a screw locking connector, so you unscrew it to loosen it off, put it onto the RCA socket, and then sort of screw it up to tighten it around the RCA socket. They're nice. I don't think they're better or worse than anything else that I've just tried here. These are very similar to what Super use. I actually do kind of like the bullet RCA plugs that they use on the Curious cables. So I think probably all in all, I'd say it's a nice, non-flashy cable that delivers fantastic, very natural sound. Probably not the best I've heard overall, but at the price, I would say they're the best that I've heard up to that $300 US mark. So if you're in the market for some nice interconnects that won't break the bank but are sort of a bit premium, then definitely have a look at the Tellurium Q Black version 2 RCAs. And I probably should mention at this point, I've now done a few reviews of the Tellurium Q. This is not in any way sponsored by Tellurium. They probably have no idea I've got these. These have been provided by the local distributor. They're going back to the distributor at the end. There's no affiliations. There's no kickbacks or anything here. This is just me trying out some gear because I enjoy it and therefore sharing it with you. And that's why I'm able to stand here and tell you that these aren't the best RCA cable that I've tried, but they are very good for their price. And likewise, I've thoroughly enjoyed the power cable. I've thoroughly enjoyed the speaker cable to the point that I've actually asked to buy a set. And now I'm next up going to look at the Black version 2 USB cable to see how that compares to my current favorite, which is the Tubulus Consentus. And I've also got the Curious Evolve USB cable as another sort of secondary USB favorite. So if you want to see that one, make sure you subscribe and ring the notification bell. That video is coming out tomorrow. Don't forget to check out the previous Tweak Week videos if you haven't already. And for now, if you found this video interesting and informative, then I'd love it if you'd hit the like button, and please subscribe and ring the notification bell if you haven't already. For now though, let me leave it to the music, so happy listening, be kind to each other, and I'll see you here next time on Passion for Sound.